Hello YouTube, this is Redhead Takes, back again with another video. Week 4 of the NFL season has concluded, and we are on to week 5. Last week I was 9-7, so not too bad, but overall could be better. Let's get into the picks right away. You know where to find me: Twitter, Twitch, locals, YouTube of course. And let's get on to the video. In the first game, we have Indianapolis Colts versus the Denver Broncos. In this matchup, it's going to be really interesting to see because I'm expecting Jonathan Taylor not to play. We already know that Javonte Williams is probably out for the season with that terrible knee injury. Both of these teams are incredibly frustrating to watch. I keep expecting either one or both of them to explode offensively, and neither have done so. Denver probably has more potential because of Russell Wilson, but me thinks the Colts are going to eventually break up, but I'm not sure if it's this week. It's in Denver against a Denver defense who didn't have the greatest week, so they'll probably look for a bounce back week. I'm going to go with Denver just on short rest, but honestly it could go either way due to the fact that both teams have injuries and both teams do not have the greatest offensive lines right now. Denver with the slightly better defense, I'll go with them. Next we have the New York Giants versus the Green Bay Packers. The fucking stupid London game. Green Bay's the final team to make the trip to London, and we'll see what happens. Both teams won last week. Giants a little bit more convincingly than the Packers, but Giants were playing the Bears, and the Bears aren't very good. And yes, the Packers won at the end of the game. I still think they're a better team than the Giants overall. Giants are dealing with some injuries. Lost some defensive backs this week. Sterling Shepard is out, of course. Kenny Galladay got hurt, so they're losing pieces rapidly. Saquon Barkley should have a decent day against the Packers rushing defense if they don't improve at all. But I still like the Packers to win pretty handily just because quarterback situation. Daniel Jones might not play, so if there's no Daniel Jones, they're really up a creek at that point. So I think the Packers win pretty handily, although the location factor could have favored the Giants since some of the players in the Giants have played in London before, but I think the Packers will be ready to play. Next we have Pittsburgh versus Buffalo. I'm just going to say it, and I think Buffalo is going to win this game. It's not going to be like last year in the opening game of the season where Buffalo falls apart and Pittsburgh is able to come back. I'm glad they've finally switched to Kenny Pickett. He's a much better quarterback, I think, going forward. It's really hard to advocate going back to Trubisky after his performance last week, and the fact that they put in Kenny Pickett mid-game shows that they really can't go back now. Even though the Steelers are going into a really tough stretch of games, and honestly, I see them maybe winning one of them, but that might be a stretch. They have a tough schedule. Could not be a worse schedule for Kenny Pickett to go into, but if he shines through, it's going to be a huge boost to his development. I like Kenny Pickett going forward. He's just going to have some growing pains. Now, the Bills looked great last week. Started out a little slow, but eventually they poured it on towards the end of this first half, shutting down Lamar Jackson for the most part, intercepting him at the goal line. Yeah, unclear if Isaiah McKenzie will play this week or Jameson Crowder, but I think Buffalo will still have more than enough to beat down on Pittsburgh. It's in Buffalo, so I think Buffalo has an advantage there. Josh Allen is just running towards that MVP, and it's hard to argue against him potentially being the MVP this year. But I think the Bills and Steelers are close for a while, but I think the Bills pull through. I just think Pittsburgh's going to have a lot of tough times protecting Pickett with a terrible offensive line, and Najee Harris is probably not going to have too many running lanes to get any big gaining yards. So Bills in a not very close game. Next we have the Chargers versus the Cleveland Browns. Another toss-up game, to be honest. Cleveland lost last week against the Falcons, which is embarrassing. Probably should have won that game. Chargers winning, but in not so convincing fashion, letting Houston come back into the game. I'm going to pick the Chargers, even though their offensive line is not so good. I think sooner or later, Herbert's going to shine through. Last week, Eckler finally had a great game. It's about time. Browns have a lot going. I think whether Cleveland wins or not depends on the availability of Myles Garrett. It probably hurt them last week that he wasn't playing. So, depending on if Myles Garrett plays, I think it could go either way. But I'm going to go with the Chargers for now. I just think they have a little bit more offensive firepower. But Nick Chubb should have a great game against that defense, though. So, it'll probably be a close one throughout. But I think in the end, the Chargers win out. Next we have Chicago versus Minnesota. I hate picking the Vikings, but I just think they're just a better team. The Bears are terrible. Their defense isn't great. Khalil Herbert is pretty good for what he is. But the offensive line is not great. Minnesota won by the skin of their teeth last week. Probably should have won by much more. Surprising how many issues they had with the Saints, even though the Saints have a great defense. But I like Minnesota to pull through on this one. I think they're just a better team. It is a divisional matchup, but I think maybe Chicago could possibly win in Chicago against the Vikings, just not in Minnesota. But probably going to be a surprisingly close game just because it's an NFC North matchup. But I will go with Minnesota in a close game. Next we have the Detroit Lions versus the New England Patriots. A toss-up game for sure. Again, Detroit looked great offensively. Their defense just can't stop anybody. New England, I don't know who's going to start this week at quarterback. I bet Bailey Zappi will probably get the start because Mac Jones probably won't play, and who knows if Hoyer will be available if he passes the concussion protocol. But even still, I think I would grudgingly go with the Lions. The Lions have a better offense, and the Patriots do have a pretty good defense. Just think their offense is really hit or miss. Yeah, they looked great against the Packers last week, but the Packers just played down to the level of their competition, to be honest. I think the Lions finally get a win after the last couple of weeks of scoring so many points and not having any defense. It's really hard. I think I'll go with the Lions, but I'm not feeling too great about it just because of New England's track record against Detroit. Matt Patricia revenge game, but in the long run, I think Detroit wins in a close game. Next, we have the Seattle Seahawks versus the New Orleans Saints. I think I don't even feel great about saying that. I think the home field advantage will help the Saints. Their offense looked surprisingly good last week, considering Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas are out. I have a feeling Alvin Kamara will play this game. I think they just held him out just to be on the safe side, give him another week to recover. Michael Thomas, who knows if he plays, I don't know how bad his injury is. It is a foot injury, so it could be somewhat severe. I bet Michael Thomas has a good chance to play, but we'll wait and see. Andy Dalton definitely looked great last week for what he is. Honestly, I think the Saints should go with him the rest of the season until Winston is fully recovered with his back injury. You can't throw him out there again with visible back injury concerns. Seattle, their offense looked great. Yes, it's against the Detroit Lions, so make of that what you will. Rashad Penny hit his first breakthrough game of the season. Not until the second quarter really get going, but he did get going. DK Metcalf had a great week last week. Geno Smith has looked pretty good so far. In a toss-up game, I think it goes to the Saints just because of the home field advantage and the better defense. I don't think the Seahawks will run over the Saints like they did Detroit last week. But it should be a pretty decent game, close game. But I'm going to go with the Saints in a close one. Next we have the Jets versus the Miami Dolphins. Another toss-up division game. Tua's already been ruled out, so it'll be Teddy Bridgewater this week. And he looked pretty good on offense last week. Jets pulling off the win at the end of the game last week. Breece Hall is finally taking over that running back role. It looks like he's nearly taking it over. Michael Carter did not get many carries last week. Breece Hall got the lion's share. Their offense is looking better. I expect Zach Wilson will develop more chemistry with Garrett Wilson in the future. But their offense looked pretty good for what it was last week. It was against the Steelers, but they did pull out a win in the end. The Dolphins, their offense should still be fine. Teddy Bridgewater didn't look so bad last week. His one interception to end the game basically last week was more so on Mike Gesicki running the wrong route. And their defense is okay. I think in the toss-up game, I think I like the Jets just a little bit more. It's probably going to bite me in the ass to expect the Jets to win 2 games and for Miami to lose 2. But I think the Jets win, but I'm not feeling too great about it. It's probably going to come down to the end, or Miami wins in a blowout, and then I'll be really wrong. But Jets for now. Next we have Atlanta Falcons versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think the Buccaneers will be just great this week. They played the Chiefs last week and didn't look very good. Offense looked fine for the most part, but their defense got abused. I like Tampa Bay defense to have a rebound this week against Falcons. Falcons with the surprising win last week, and Mariota only completing 7 passes. That shouldn't win you a game. Patterson looks great at running back. Drake London was kind of absent last week. Same thing with Kyle Pitts. Maybe they'll have a rebound game, but I think Tampa Bay is going to dominate this game from top to bottom. Maybe Atlanta gets a score in early on, but in the long run, I don't expect Tampa Bay's defense to have 2 bad weeks. I think this is a good team to rebound against, and I think it'll definitely happen. Their offense should be much better. And yeah, I like Tampa Bay to win this one. Next game we have the Tennessee Titans versus the Washington Commies. Another toss-up game. Tennessee proving that maybe they're not so bad. They're first in their division. I don't think they're fully back. I still think they're going to struggle for the most part, but they're playing the Commies, who look like they just gave up last week for the most part. I don't even know how to feel about Washington. They're just terrible. They have pieces on offense, but Wentz is just so hot and cold. And he could be on the downward spiral. Tennessee, Derrick Henry looks to be back better than ever, and just about as good as he was last year. Offensive line is kind of a mess, but I don't think that affects Henry too much. Tannehill had a decent bounce back game, or he had a decent game. I think Tennessee wins this one pretty handily. I don't like Washington at all on this game, really. Even though it's in Washington, I think Derrick Henry has a pretty good day again, and it probably won't be too close. So I'll go with Tennessee in this one. Next we have Houston versus Jacksonville. Jacksonville coming off the loss, although they look decent for the most part, had a couple of turnovers that kept them from winning, got out to a great start. Houston had a decent game. They made it somewhat close in the end, but overall their defense is really bad. Dameon Pierce is starting to come on really strong. Davis Mills still looked better last week, but he's still kind of hot and cold. Jacksonville, I think, is just the better team, and I think they'll win out. James Robinson didn't have the greatest game last week, but Lawrence still was pretty good for the most part. If they cut down on the turnovers, they should win somewhat easily. But it's a Houston versus Jacksonville, so you can never count that game for sure. But I like Jacksonville. It's in Jacksonville. They seem to be doing pretty well in Jacksonville this year, so Jacksonville in the win. Next we have Carolina versus San Francisco. San Francisco dominated the Rams last night. Carolina, I hate covering Carolina. I just think they're the most uninteresting team and one of the most uninteresting teams in the league. McCaffrey was okay, I guess. Baker's just really not the answer that Panthers thought. Rule will probably lose his job at the end of the year. It's his contract that is probably keeping him alive. But San Francisco, yeah, their offense still needs to improve, but their defense looks pretty good. I think San Francisco wins this pretty easily. Although it is in Carolina, so maybe that's a wild card, but I don't really think it is. I think San Francisco wins somewhat easily, maybe close early on, but San Francisco pulls away with their rushing attack and surprisingly good Jimmy G action. Next we have Dallas versus the Rams. Grudgingly, I'll pick Dallas because they just been a better team throughout. Cooper Rush has surprisingly been good. He still hasn't lost a game in his starting career. Rams are just a mess. Their offensive line is just not the same without Andrew Whitworth, and I don't expect that to get any better with Micah Parsons coming into town. Dallas should win this. I don't know. It'll probably be somewhat close. I don't want to say it's a blowout for Dallas. The Rams still have Cooper Kupp, of course, who had set a career high in receptions last week. So I think the Rams have a decent chance to win. I'll begrudgingly go with Dallas. I don't like picking Dallas. I still think they're not a great team. They just had a somewhat easy schedule. But in the end, I think Dallas wins in a close game. Next, we have Arizona versus Philly. Philly, I like to continue to win. Their offense should improve this week, although Arizona has been surprisingly done well at keeping down the opposing team's number one receiving option, so that'll probably continue. But I think Philly just has way too much on offense, although they did lose a key piece on their offensive line and some defensive pieces, so who knows how long those will be out. Darius Slay says he's fine, so we'll leave that up to him. He should shut down their number one receiving threat in Marquise Brown. Kyler Murray's just up and down. If only Arizona could play a full game, they could maybe be a good team, but they haven't shown that yet, and I don't expect that to happen this week. Philly by a decent margin, but it should be close early on at the very least. Next we have Cincinnati versus Baltimore. I think Baltimore wins in a rebound game. Cincinnati got it somewhat together last week, but they were still slow for most of the game. And Burrow had a great game, and guys were just dropping balls and running wrong routes. Cincinnati probably should have won by more last week. Baltimore, I think, rebounds. Their J.K. Dobbins looks back to what he was. Their defense is still hit and miss. Should be a great offensive battle for the most part. Probably whoever has less turnovers wins the game. But I like Lamar Jackson to rebound. I don't think he's going to have a bad game like he did last week, even though last week he had a decent rushing game. But those 2 interceptions were just killers. And Cincinnati, just until Joe Mixon can get back on it and Cincinnati's offensive line can stay cohesive for a whole game, I think Baltimore wins, but it should be pretty close. In the final game, we have Las Vegas versus Kansas City. The Raiders rebounding last week. Josh Jacobs with a great performance. Devontae Adams did all right. Kansas City with a dominating performance over Tampa Bay. Wasn't as close as the box score said. Kansas City probably wins this game. Although Mahomes is, I don't know, he's good. But they just had some bad series last game that could have made the game even farther apart. Their rushing game looks great. Their defense is definitely looks to be all it's about to be. And Las Vegas' bad defense is probably not going to allow them to win this game. although it's a divisional game, so it's anybody's matchup, but I think Kansas City wins pretty handily. And that was the video for the week. Again, as always, if you disagree with any of my picks, you can hit me up in the comment section or any of the fine social media sites that I have in my description. Hope you have a great week. Go Pack Go, and God bless.